Welcome to Module 5 of the course. This module explores the security and administrative sides to T-SQL and Microsoft SSMS. The main learning objectives of this module are as follows. We're going to identify how to secure a database and the objects associated with it. Secondly, we'll learn how to add individual users to a particular database and set their individual permission levels of the database, of modifying the database. And thirdly, we will learn the backup and restore functions of a database. So let's get started. Here we'll be providing an overview of the terminology that is used to describe the different levels of security used in SQL Server. A couple of terms to begin with are the securables, the principals, and the permissions. In this module, it focuses mostly on principal level permissions that are applied on a per user basis, which I'll talk about later. The schematic provides an overview of different securables that are granted different permission levels depending on the securable user. And there are 3 access levels that may be granted per securable user. The first one is the SQL Server itself. The second is the database. And then the third is any database object, such as the rules, the tables, the views, the functions, and even the type of database itself. And this is distinct from the principal level of security, which requires a separate authentication, essentially. Regarding the login process to the SQL Server and permissions granted for which, authentication is typically granted on a per user basis. And the login itself is a type A of security principal that requires typically authentication. And here you can decide specialized permissions per user. The database level, the entire database may be granted per user via a mapping process to the SQL login. So this mapping allows for the user or also a group to access or have permission to access the database. Finally, you can be granted just object access, which hence its name is applied at the object level for each user to only have access to particular objects within a database, as I had just previously mentioned. Regarding authentication, which is basically the verification of login credentials in the SQL Server, there are 2 main methods for this. The first being the Windows authentication, which is the most common, and the second being a mixed mode authentication, which, as its name implies, it's primarily for logins outside of the Windows environment. And here is where you have your sysadmin or SA account access within mixed mode authentication, or mixed mode accounts actually. So a little bit about fixed server roles. Basically, there are 3 main types of these roles, as mentioned: the sysadmin or SA, what's called the database creator, and then the security admin, which I believe is the SA, security admin being the third type of fixed role. And then there are also these are three roles that cannot be created. They are automatically populated per SQL server, and the user. But there's an alternative for user-defined server roles, which are essentially customized, and these roles determine the permission level per user. A little bit more about the security of a database. So each user is considered to have a security principle mapped to it, as previously mentioned. And the login can be mapped to many different databases, not just one, but for different users. But each user can only have access to each particular database at a time. And within fixed database roles and user-defined roles, they function very similarly in terms of how database users are populated. And as a default feature of SQL Server, you have all users are automatically given what are called public database roles, which function at three different tiers: the SQL Server level, the database or principal level, and the database object or role level, kind of as previously mentioned. The public database role is granted one method or one application of which is for printing databases. Okay, a little bit more about the fixed database roles. There are a couple more terminologies for those. And that kind of summarizes the major terms for database security and permission access. Now we'll be performing a demo of granting permissions in SQL Server. Here in our table view, we're going to hover over to the Security tab and expand it, and expand the Logins subfolder. Here we're going to see all the users that have logins for this particular database, which was mapped to them. So we're actually going to right-click this and hit New Login. So under this login name field, we're going to call this NT service / Sally. And here this provides an overview of these tabs for what we just learned about database security. So under user mapping, we can see that we can assign particular databases to this new user. So we can assign, for example, my demo database by just simply selecting the map box. And under securables, we can actually search for specific objects to assign to this new user. We can try searching, and we can see under permissions, we can get it assign particular permissions. So there are three types of permissions we may assign, or commands rather, per permission: grant, with grant, and deny. And we'll talk more about these commands later. And so you can see that there are many different permissions that are allowable as part of the securables for this particular user. And under status, we can actually, for the entire database engine, we can either outright grant or deny permission to connect or map to the database itself. And that pretty much sums up all of the allowable permissions. Oh, and finally, under server roles, we can actually assign also, just as we had talked about the security admin and the server admin and the sysadmin roles. But typically that wouldn't be done for just one user since this has access to everything in the database. So that wouldn't typically be done. But public is always, again, assigned by default for every user in the database or every user of which the database is mapped to. So we'll press OK now. Looks like it didn't work. We'll try to assign a different database. Let's try VentureWorks 2012. Also try tempdb. So after clicking OK, that's essentially how you would create a new user with particular permissions assigned to it in securables. We could try, we could try mapping to a certificate rather than through a Windows authentication. That has to be specified, which we don't have for this course. But a SQL Server authentication may also be used, of course. So the way it would look for an existing user, let's try this one. If we just go to properties, right click and then properties, we'll see what it looks like here for this user. They actually don't have any databases assigned or any securables. We try to assign the mapper database to it. We just press OK, and there it is. It's assigned. It's as simple as that. You can go back to right-click properties. You can see that the AdventureWorks database is in fact assigned to user SQL writer. So aside from specific user accounts, guest log in accounts may be used. Any guest user account has no default permissions assigned. And for every in SQL Server, there always is a default guest user account. And these cannot be completely removed from SQL Server, but they can be disabled. And by default, they're enabled, of course, but there is a command for which it can be disabled using the revoke command, which we'll get to later. So there, as was seen in SQL Server for the example guest user, not guest, user account permissions, there are three commands that may be used. The first two were shown in SQL Server, grant and deny. So grant is pretty self-explanatory, grants access for that particular object. Now, deny, it's essentially any grant permission that's assigned, it's overridden. And this deny command is the typical use case for it is for a specific user that has many roles specific permissions or customized permissions, not permissions. So essentially deny will just override those existing permissions within the user. And revoke, just as the name implies, will actually remove a previously assigned permission, essentially reverses this, whatever the previously assigned permission is for a particular user. And if revoke is used after deny, it essentially nullifies or takes away the deny the deny command from the user. It's like an overriding of deny. That's what revoke does. Typically, in a lot of databases, you'll have grant, then followed immediately by revoke. per user permissions. Okay. Just as we had learned in the previous module, so as far as object permissions are concerned, all of the commands, all the DML statements, as well as other commands, may be used to grant or deny permissions per user, which are called object permissions. So it gets down to even a specific command that may or may not be performed, or statement that may or may not be executed within the SQL Server per user. So we learned about select, insert, delete, update, delete, and then the other ones are DRI and execute, also called EFCC. Now we'll just be moving on to the final segment of this module, which is going to talk about backups and restores. A database backup is essentially performed to secure the data within the database, all of its objects, such that in the event that there is a disconnect from the SQL Server, that data may be retrieved via backup. So this can be essentially, there are a couple of different types of backups, which I'll cover in just a bit. But either the data may be restored in the event of a power disconnect from the SQL Server, or when a user may accidentally delete a table. Individual tables may also be restored within a database. So the three types of backups are the full backup, the differential, and the incremental backup. The full backup, as the name implies, backup all of the data contained within the particular database or collection of databases or files, and also just a portion of the transaction log. In a differential backup, it actually is just a backup of the data contained within the database of the most recent backup date, hence the name differential. The advantage of using a differential backup versus full is that the backup time is minimized because it's only accessing the most recently, only the data has changed within the database, not all of the data itself. Finally, we have the incremental backup, which is similar to the differential backup, but it includes all transaction logs within the database. So it's similar to the differential backup because it only backs up data that has changed since the last backup. It could be either a full or incremental, but it differs from the differentials that it includes the transaction logs. So hence it typically takes longer to perform an incremental backup as compared to a differential. So we're actually going to perform a demonstration of a backup. We're going to minimize this security folder, and then we're going to expand the databases. And then we're going to go to my DemoDB tables. We're going to actually just create a new table. We can just create some column names. We'll just call this call 1. Call 2. And call 3. Okay. So we're going to first save this right clicking and pressing save. We'll call this document. Okay. So now that we have our table created, we're going to right click and hit refresh. And then here we have our DBO database object created in the viewable in the table view. Next, we're actually just going to, so now that it's saved, we know it's saved because the asterisk is no longer inside of the tab. So we'll just right click and delete. Press OK. It's executing the function. The GUI. Okay. So this was deleted, but you still see the tab of the database object. Now, under my demo DB, we're going to right click and we're actually going to go to tasks and then restore and then database. Oh, that's interesting. It's actually going to go back. We're going to undo that. So we're just going to make the same database again. The backup wasn't performed on that. So you can see, as you can see, if there's no backup performed, there's no restore function available. So we'll compare. Go back to tasks and then we'll go to restore and database. Here, where it says restore plan, backup system restore, there's none available in the queue because nothing was restored. So we're going to cancel that. We're going to make the same table again to compare. No, not new database. We're actually going to make a new table under tables, new table. Okay. So again, we're just going to right click and hit save. We're going to name this again demo table backup exists backup to. Okay. Now we're actually going to go to my demo DB. We're going to go to tasks backup. Okay. What's important about this window here is that under destination, we want to specify where this will be backed up. So that can be changed. Click contents. Actually, we can click contents, add the asterisk box, and then we can actually change where we save the backup. So that's a key feature there. Here, we'll just keep it here. So we'll just press now backup type. We have full and differential available. We don't have incremental because incremental only works off of previously created backups. So that's why we don't have it. And we'll just go full. And for the MyDemoDB database, you can see there are other databases available in the queue for the dropdown. Now we'll click OK. It was completed. Now we're going to refresh the table. Here's our backup 2 object. So then we're going to right click and now we're going to delete this. We're going to click OK. So it's executing here. Now that after that being deleted, having been deleted, we can right click and we can go to tasks, back or restore databases. Okay, and here it is in the queue. So this can be a little bit tricky because sometimes there's a little bit of discrepancy with SQL Server accessing the database due to connection, a lack of connection to the server. So this, let's see if this works. Sometimes you just do it a couple of times. So if you just press OK and see what happens. So it's performing the restore function. As you can see, it's available to be restored because it was backed up first. See, there was an execution error. So this means that the database table was not backed up, unfortunately. We can go to verify backup data. Timeline. That's okay. We can try it again. So it failed once again. So try to verify. So it's verified successfully. What we also can do here is let me take a look at our properties, which would match the backup ones. And then we can also go to our restore tasks, backup, and try a differential backup. Okay, let's see. Like I said, there's sometimes issues with performing the backup because of connection discrepancies with MySQL Server. We can go to again tasks and then restore database. So there are two available now, the differential and the full. We're gonna only select we're gonna select both of them. Let's say I'm gonna verify it. It was verified successfully. Now I'll click OK. Still failed. One more thing we could do is we could perform a third backup. And specify a different file location. Could try here, perhaps. SQL Server. This could be a reason why the back isn't restored successfully. Actually, we'll go back. We'll try to get to two different places. This is not working. I'm going to remove the second one. We're just call this actually the name of the server. One more time. Access was denied. Try overwriting this. Okay. So we just can do try it one more time. One more time. So essentially this is how you would do it. Again, right click, tasks, restore databases. Unfortunately, it failed because it's in use. So we actually would just have to close these databases, these tables rather. So let's try doing it again one more time. This could be the reason. Try again. Okay, so now it's restored successfully. So now you know when you're trying to restore, have the object that you're trying to restore closed or the database. Okay, so we're going to right click and we're going to, we can refresh and then we can also refresh the tables. Under system tables, we can go and right click and press refresh and it would appear in that, it would appear under here. Fortunately, it's not doing that. But that's where it was restored successfully. Try one more time. Let's verify first. Okay, verify successfully and then okay. Okay, now let's go to tables. Let's expand this in under system tables. So it would appear there. And that pretty much concludes, that's how it would appear under system tables. I think it would have now. Wouldn't have been there. Would have been under just tables. Try revision a little bit. That's where it would appear. So now the last part of this module is the summary. In this module, we basically covered the secure and restore, the security and restoration functions of databases in MySQL Server. We talked about three main tiers of securing databases and objects, starting at the server level, then followed by the database level, and then finally by the object level, which includes specific role-specific permissions that may be assigned to a user. And basically these permissions, the database itself may be mapped first to a security principal or user in order for them to access the database and the objects contained with it. These are the same terms here. And finally, within permissions, there are three functions that may be performed for specific users: grant, deny, or revoke. There either may be fixed server roles, which are default for every SQL server, and then there are user-defined server roles. Fixed server roles being these: database owner, database data reader, and database data writer, as well as other ones. And finally, In this module, we have guest user accounts that are included in every database that cannot be removed, but they may be disabled or by default enabled. And finally, the different types of database backups that may be performed in SQL Server, namely the full, the differential, and the incremental, depending on the time at which the backup is needed. For example, scripts may be written to perform differential backups every 48 hours, perhaps, rather than performing a full backup, which is not needed because it'll only be retrieving data from the database within the last 48 hours, within data that has been changed within the last 48 hours. So this concludes Module 5 of the SQL Server Administration Fundamentals course.